Thanks for tuning in to another installment of Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast that analyzes shows and celebrates women of television. Thousands of comedies, variety shows, and dramas have aired, yet the presence of strong women, both in front of and behind the camera, is often a story untold. Well, Advanced TV Herstory begs to differ. There's so much more, and it's worth telling and retelling. Sometimes shows offer great leadership lessons, or are so timeless in their writing that people say the series has aged well. We'll explore those shows further. We'll revisit moments in TV where women broke records, exceeded expectations, or put their careers on the line. Advanced TV Herstory will connect the treasures of the past to the great potential of today's TV and online platforms, and how it all plays a part in being a woman in America today. Tomorrow's success is rooted in understanding what has come before us. So gear up for a little storytelling and fun, sociology, fashion, economics, or strategy. It's all here in Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Welcome to the third and final installment in a series that profiles the many talented, funny women who played such a huge role in the making of The Mary Tyler Moore Show. This segment focuses on the creators James L. Brooks and Alan Burns' first woman writer, Treva Silverman. Now, there will be some who say that it's counterproductive or lacks self-esteem or something to perpetuate the distinction between a woman in the profession, any profession, and simply that profession. Haven't we passed that milepost yet? As one who was a teenager during the formative years of the ERA and Title IX's application to the school environment, that would have been my expectation too. But 40 years later, to be the sole woman in the room, struggling perhaps to frame your voice in a culture that possibly dismisses or still talks over it, is to know that our progress for equality and opportunity across professions is inconsistent at best. And if you're currently the only woman in the boardroom, or the squad room, the engineering division, or otherwise at the dais, featured as an attractive token of your profession's or organization's progressivism, you are acutely aware of the situation. You don't need to talk about it. You don't want to talk about it. But you do want to do something about it. That's because this movement for equality has now been going on for 40 or more years. Comedy writer Treva Silverman was brought in to write partly for her perspective on how to frame a woman's voice realistically in a script, and because she was a funny, talented person. We see that in how some of the best plots and character development involve male characters, Lou, Ted, and Murray. Silverman's hiring by Brooks and Burns opened the gates and the opportunities for so many other women. So today's movement for equal opportunity, equitable pay, and even character roles that aren't gender-specific so that they may be cast with the best performer is the mission of organizations worldwide. And their efforts are supported by even more organizations who dedicate themselves to women's issues across professions, across geography and political concerns, and across socioeconomic strata. So as the saying goes, knowledge is power. The goal of Advanced TV Herstory is to imbue you with a little knowledge or perspective, as well as celebrate the work of talented women. After all, you learn better when you're having fun. And what's more fun than talking about TV? We are renewed and inspired when we hear the stories of others, like us, who gave it all they had and succeeded. So let's meet Treva Silverman. Actually, we'll do so hearing from Jennifer Keishin Armstrong, whose 2013 book, Mary and Lou and Rhoda and Ted, has served as the framework for these podcasts. Armstrong's book weaves the formative years of Silverman's career through the Mary Tyler Moore Show's 7 years on the air.
I love Treva so much. She's become such a huge role model for me. She was involved from actually the very, very beginning. I got lucky, and when I was working on the proposal for this book, before I even sold it to a publisher, I wanted to do some research. And you can't just call up like Valerie Harper and be like, "Hey, I'm working on a proposal for a book that may or may not happen. You want to just hang out with me?" Like, no, you can't do that. But I thought maybe some of the writers and producers, they're a little more accessible. they might understand that I'm trying, what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to talk about their legacy and all this stuff. So anyway, the point is that she had been interviewed by a TV writer named Ken Levine, who has a fantastic blog about television and is a wonderful guy in his own right. And he had interviewed her because they're friends. Because I found this, I sort of just worked through the social media channels and found her on Facebook, and direct messaged her, and she responded. And I explained what I was doing. And I think because the focus was so much on the women and their legacy too, this was a huge selling point for a lot of the women, including Valerie Harper eventually. I told her what I wanted to do, and she was happy to get on the phone for half an hour and just sort of chat me through it. And she also was kind enough to get me in touch with Alan Burns, one of the co-creators, right away. And he got on the phone with me very generously for a half hour or so, just so I could write this proposal. And that was really helpful, obviously, but needed more after that. So yeah, I spent, I obviously spent several hours with her on and off through the process of the book. I mean, some of it just became sort of casual, we would just have dinner because we wanted to have dinner and I was in LA to do research. We did talk on the phone a few times as well. And then with her thing, you pointed out, I tell a giant chunk of her actual life story in this book because I love it so much. She's just such a badass woman character. She was a piano virtuoso when she was a child. She was playing piano in a bar in New York City. She just has this sort of very glamorous, picturesque life that I think we look at now and say oh, that's the coolest thing. She worked for Carol Burnett. She just had everything that I wanted in this story. To me, she was sort of the real Mary Tyler Moore. That was sort of how I was looking at it, and that's why I started the book with her. So because I was telling so much of her story, I really worked very closely with her, more than I often do with a lot of my interview subjects.
In addition to Armstrong's reflections about Silverman, we're also going to hear from Silverman firsthand. Well, sort of. Silverman sat for a 2007 interview with Alan Newworth and Emmy TV Legends, the video archive of the American Television Academy and the American Television Foundation. Silverman's Emmy distinction is her selection as the first woman, without a male writing partner, to be honored with Best Writing in Comedy and Writer of the Year. That year was 1974. Silverman grew up on Long Island in a household that supported her creative exploration and her gift, which was recognized when Silverman was a young girl, for music. She studied music and pursued songwriting as a career. To pay the bills, she had a job as a singing pianist in a Manhattan restaurant, and that's where James L. Brooks started up a conversation with her. In addition to piano, though, Silverman's youth and early adult years were spent immersed in theater, books, magazines, and listening to the radio. From early in her childhood, she knew she could find humor in situations, particularly those that she considered cliché, as she recounts in the Emmy TV Legends interview. It's in that interview also that she cites one of her early influences.
I mean, the big influence electronically was Steve Allen. I loved how he broke the fourth wall, and he was just this guy. Instead of sort of being up on a pedestal, he was this guy, and he'd laugh at his own things, and he'd be silly. And I grew up in a time where grown-ups weren't silly. They were, we are without flaw, and kids are the ones with flaws. And here he was being a handsome, adorable, talented, silly man. And once I had the luck to briefly work with him, and I told him instantly, you don't know how many people you've influenced. That was wonderful.
So, loaded with talent, she made her way to Hollywood. Now, remember, the 60s blend of comedy was pretty mild in contrast to what followed not long thereafter. Amidst the tremors of the civil rights movement, political assassinations, and the Vietnam War, CBS soothed a jittery nation with, as we see it today, campy humor of Green Acres, the Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, and the like. Silverman found work on the Monkees, and in this clip talks about what it was like to pitch a story idea to an executive, a male executive, of That Girl, which was an early sitcom centered on a single woman. You would have thought they would have cared what a single woman had to pitch.
I had rehearsed all day, had done nothing else. It was That Girl, pitch session was the whole thing. I go in and he's shaving. So I said, oh, well, I'll wait till you. No, that's okay, I can listen. And so I'm doing, so he's going like that into the mirror as I'm talking. It was so obnoxious. It was just so, well, let's just establish pecking order here. There's the pecker and the peckee, and we knew who was who. So about 2 months later, I'm at a party, and here's this same guy. So I go up to him, and, oh, yes, Treva, I remember. So I said, listen, I just came up with a great idea for That Girl. And I said, something about one of her friends wants to be a television writer, and she goes in and she pitches an idea, and the guy is shaving. He said, that's interesting. He totally didn't remember the thing that had shattered me, that had just made me feel so insignificant. I thought, I hope I never have to pitch to this particular guy.
Shortly thereafter, Silverman was fortunate to find a pair in Brooks and Allen who appreciated her for her ideas and knew her humor and perspective would be instrumental in the show that they were preparing. As the first woman hired, Silverman set a tone and functioned a bit as a filter. I get the sense that she had to use great diplomacy and patience, discussing ideas and details down to the very words and phrases, with men who are now considered masters of the sitcom craft as well.
The guys were at that throughout it. It was Alan Burns, Jim Brooks. The second year was Ed Weinberger, came in the second season. Also, the first season was Dave Davis and Lorenzo Music. They were, I wouldn't say they were sexist. I wouldn't say they were sexist. I would say they were, in some ways, kind of unthinking. In some ways, not all the time. People have written about me of like, if it wasn't for me, but that's not it. They were very responsive. I would say, hey, if you say, which do you prefer, a career or a relationship, you wouldn't say that to a guy. And they would say, hey, yeah, you're right. Sexist guys would have said, well, but they were responsive to it. To me, the stuff would jump out because I'm going to these women's meetings and I'm reading Kate Millett. I'm reading all the transforming books. So I knew the, watchwords and things to look out and hang a lantern on and say, okay, Alan, it really seems to me that if you say this, somebody has to speak against this or whatever. But they were enormously responsive.
In her book, Armstrong recounts the disastrous taping of the first Mary Tyler Moore Show episode. From a number of people who were there, each reflected on how Murphy's Law surfaced, camera placement, air conditioning, faltering, all sorts of factors that shake the very confidence of a newly formed team, and it dampened everyone's enthusiasm. The audience didn't laugh. Part of the disconnect with that audience may have been, too, that they were the first to receive a sitcom about a single woman, not in New York or L.A., reliant on no man, who worked in a profession in which she was not a secretary or a housekeeper. She was respected by her male coworkers and contributed constructively at work. The comedy wasn't about her shortcomings or her being a woman. The comedy was about her life situations. Part of that comedy was the woman neighbor, Rhoda, who would become her best friend. In that first episode, Silverman's fingerprints are all over Rhoda.
So she had a lot of experience. So they knew they wanted her right away. And she kind of went in there and just did her thing. Like, she was ready to go. And she wrote several of the first season scripts and continued to, but definitely like right away was writing. Besides the two guys who actually created it, she was in there from the beginning. And a lot of people will tell you that she kind of helped to really create the character of Rhoda. I think she strongly identified with Rhoda. She was, among other things, a Jewish woman from New York, obviously pretty, self-sufficient and funny. All of these things are the same as Rhoda. So she really kind of helped to make that character into something besides just they kind of had her as fat sidekick. Like, that's basically what they had her down as at the beginning, which is ridiculous on many, many levels, obviously, because among other things, she was not particularly overweight. They kind of had this idea of this schlubby sidekick. So that's what she was playing at first. And Treva really turned her into a person who had a lot going on for her. And one of my favorite stories is that she eventually wrote what I think is my favorite episode. That's about when Rhoda enters a beauty contest at the department store where she works. No, Hempel's. I'm sure it's a play on Gimbals. So she kind of reluctantly enters this beauty contest. I'm always wondering, I'm like, she must have been forced to, just because, like, how many people could possibly be in this beauty like, there can only be so many people on staff at Hempel's. Anyway, she enters it after she loses like 20 pounds, which Valerie had lost 20 pounds in real life, and she wins. And then at first she doesn't want to tell Mary and Phyllis that she's won, because she spent the whole episode talking about how she's not going to win and she's not a beauty queen and this is all wrong. Finally, at the end, she kind of triumphantly tells them that she did win. Valerie went on to win an Emmy, having submitted this episode, and thanked Treva, from the stage at the Emmys. And my favorite part of the story is that Treva said she was watching the Emmys from like a health spa thing that she had gone to kind of lose weight. She was watching it there, and she's crying, and Valerie's crying on the screen, and it's all very nice. So it's a very emotional episode for both of them. And I also think it's one of their kind of, for lack of a better word, girlier episodes.
Silverman admits to having altered the trajectory of Rhoda. In this softened character, women enjoyed the progressive yet totally believable approach the character took in managing life's challenges. Coming from a more worldly, diverse vantage point, Rhoda Morgenstern caused Mary Richards to see other ways of advancing her life and of enjoying her life. Mary may never have grown in her confidence and owned her decisions had her neighbor been a dumpy, self-deprecating load. Valerie Harper, as an early feminist, contributed to that trajectory in her timing, her energy, and, of course, her wardrobe. Beyond softening and changing that important character's worldview and impact on Mary, Silverman brought a human side to Lou Grant and Ted Baxter. She did so by telling of their relationships with their women, Edie and Georgette.
A lot of my women friends have said they find Ed Asner very sexy. And they said, what? From a guy's point of view, they didn't see that. And I said, look, this is what I'm reporting. A lot of my single women friends say, is he married? He just is sort of really sexy and adorable. I would like to write about his relationship, and also he's always the softy under the brusqueness. I'd like to see him in pain. I'd like to see him in pain and discomforted, and something about his relationship. So then we said, Jesus, this is interesting, because this was when a lot of women were leaving men. This was 1974, I think. We decided that what it's going to be is his wife's going to leave. His wife's going to leave. So that began a whole thing with Ed Asner. I always get mixed up. Who is Lou? Who's Ed Asner? Whichever the character is, it began a whole thing with him, of his whole going out as a single man, dealing with the divorce, dealing with that. That was later on.
How does a respected sitcom writer develop the confidence to be able to tell the team, hey, let's take our gruff teddy bear character to a point of pain? She knew Asner would be capable of handling the story, as his dramatic acting credentials were well known. But rather, that position of strength came from the leadership of the organization. Both the show's leaders as well as MTM Productions, they let their writers do what needed to be done in order to advance the show in a quality way. And so before we talk about the Ted Georgette chapter, listen to how Silverman describes how Mary Tyler Moore's humility contributed to a writer's ability to take risk, at least from the vantage point of Silverman, the writer.
Had not Mary been so here's the word again, generous. The Mary Tyler Moore Show never would have been what it was. She didn't care at all about who's... She loved when it was ensemble. She loved when the supporting players had their own show. So many other people that you'll hear about or that people will work with. Well, I'm the star, and there's too many lines. She loved, absolutely loved, when anybody shone. She didn't care if it was her, if it was Ted, Val, whoever.
Did she get involved in the writing of the show at all?
None of them got involved in the writing of the show. They had supreme trust, total trust.
So when your boss and your boss's boss, they all trust you and the growing team of writers with the lives, loves, and losses of these beloved main characters, that's a pretty cool thing. It's also a little intimidating, it seems to me. They had no idea that day in and day out, what they were creating would become an American classic. In the 2 earlier segments of this podcast series, Armstrong talked about the importance of Ethel Wynant's work in casting. No single character was minimized, and each performer stuck with the show until such time as she was ready for a spin-off, namely Rhoda and Phyllis. Rounding out the core team of characters that performed through the show's 7 seasons is Ted Knight, who played anchorman Ted Baxter. Like Silverman's treatment of Lou's divorce, it took a serious romantic influence to advance another side of Ted. Georgette's path to becoming Ted's wife was not preordained in the writer's room. The episode that would serve as the send-off of Rhoda to New York required writing and casting a few co-workers. Silverman had to develop a character who would have contrasted Rhoda doing windows at Hempel's department store all these years.
So Alan said, well, she's a window dresser. Let's give her another window dresser. Okay. So the same as Jim and Alan figured out who's the perfect duet with Mary, I thought, well, who's the perfect duet with Rhoda? I mean, after all, Rhoda is the sharp, So I figured, well, ditzy. Rhoda is not ditzy. Do a ditzy one. I remembered seeing a Milos Forman film called Taking Off. And I remembered that I thought her name was Georgette Engel. So I said, okay, keep her in mind when you're writing Ditzy Girl. So I called her Georgette so that I would just remember. The minute I can get somebody's voice, that's when the writing becomes easier. So I finished that, and Alan said, oh, I like this character. Who do you see for it? And I said, Georgette Engel from Taking Off. Luckily, he had seen it. He said, yeah, that's good. That's good. We called her manager, her agent. Could she do it? Well, it's an awfully small role. But we need film on her. We need television stuff. Okay, we'll do it. Well, during rehearsal, she was so her. She was so adorable and lovable. And we developed and wrote more lines and more lines. And then at the end of the show, after we filmed it on Friday night, the decision was made to make her semi-regular. And Alan, always the generous gentleman, said, Treva, you created her. We want you to tell her. So I told her and saw the happiest person I'd ever seen in my life.
Once Georgette was in the fold for deeper character development, they found her to be the yin to Ted's yang, with a sensitivity and a sensibility he lacked. And up until spring of 2015, Georgia Engel was a regular sidekick to Betty White in TV Land's Hot in Cleveland, as a character not too far removed from Georgette. Silverman continues to serve as a resource and role model for women across many fields of creative and non-creative work. Moreover, as I hear it in her storytelling, she credits the fundamentals of leadership as it is taught and trained today as essential elements of the series' success. So let's think about it this way. Between Tinker, Moore, Brooks, and Burns, there was a vision for the show. They brought on a talented cast and crew and enabled them to stretch, take risks, and give it their all. Now, when researching for her book, Armstrong felt that that empowerment statement in many of her interviews, it resonated. That humility that was praised for having prevented obstacles otherwise found in an incredibly ego-driven industry. And without those obstacles, it assured that each team member received credit when good work was performed. And for many, that credit took the form of Emmy trophies and long-lasting relationships. By all accounts, the Mary Tyler Moore Show was exciting to work for because it challenged TV's norms of the day. Some might say that it did so for only a short period of time, as All in the Family and Maude quickly rose to take more risk with more controversial issues and a grittier style of messaging and acting. But as Armstrong points out, they all advanced the American conversation. They just did so with different approaches. From Armstrong's book and interview clips heard on this segment and the two previous, there's a consistent message that MTM Productions was a unique organization and presented a once-in-a-lifetime workplace. Tinker, Moore, Brooks, and Burns modeled the culture that created that success: humility, hard work, creativity, and diversity. Across any industry, any organization, or any basic plan, those are the ingredients of success. Thanks for tuning in to this installment of Advanced TV Herstory. Hey, put an M on your wall or a WJM patch on your blazer for having completed all 3 segments. MTM and the many people associated with it who so enthusiastically want to share their stories are an important chapter in TV Herstory. And 45 years later, they still inspire. My idea for this string of podcasts evolved when I was looking at my office bookshelf one day and saw Armstrong's book, Mary and Lou and Rhoda and Ted. To do a podcast about MTM would require a definite A-game, and Armstrong, I felt, had already written the book, literally. So as I roll these credits one more time, I want to extend a big thank you to Jennifer Keishin Armstrong for so generously agreeing to an interview. Learn more about what she's up to at jenniferkarmstrong.com. The other source of clips for this segment is the invaluable Emmy TV Legends website and an interview conducted with Treva Silverman in 2007. Please, please, please send feedback or ideas or comments to advancedtvherstory@gmail.com or leave them as public comments at iTunes or my hosting site Libsyn, libsyn.com, and then find Advanced TV Herstory in the search. This script and past scripts can be found at my website, CynthiaBemisAbrams.com. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.